It began as nothing, a whisper beneath the static of cosmic silence. Out there, beyond Neptune's icy reach, where sunlight fades into the realm of shadowed giants, something moved. It was small, unassuming, and yet it carried a kind of stillness that unsettled the equations of the heavens. Before it had a name, before any instrument marked its coordinates, it was simply the silent visitor, a ghost of motion sliding through the outer dark. The universe, in its eternal indifference, is full of wanderers. Comets torn from birth stars, asteroids exiled from collisions long forgotten. But this one was different. It did not belong. Its path was too swift, its angle too clean, as though cut from geometry not native to our sun's dominion. Its approach was precise, unwavering, as though guided not by gravity, but by intent. If a poet had seen it first, they might have called it a shard of eternity, a messenger between galaxies, carrying news from the unspoken. To astronomers, however, it would soon become a riddle of unbearable beauty, a question that defied even the silence of space. NASA's deep space monitors first recorded faint background irregularities months before any visible signature appeared. The anomalies were dismissed echoes from far-flung pulsars or fluctuations in sensor calibration, but in retrospect, those faint tremors were the first hints of Atlas, the third interstellar object ever recorded by humankind, and by far the most unexplainable. As it drifted inward, the solar wind shimmered differently around it. The dust it displaced moved as though pulled by invisible geometry. Tiny, almost imperceptible oscillations in the plasma flow, the kind that would never matter unless one was looking closely, began to align with patterns that defied randomness. It was as if the void itself bent in recognition. Later, scientists would describe the object's first detection as inevitable, as though it had chosen to be seen, as though all the blind eyes of our machines had to do was turn at the right time, and the visitor would appear. Telescopes on Mauna Kea caught it first in infrared, not a flare, not a glint, but a pulse, a rhythmic flicker repeating every 92 seconds, too faint for most detectors, but persistent, a heartbeat in the dark. At first, the team assumed it to be instrumental noise, the sort of digital whisper that haunts deep space imaging. But as they cross-referenced other observatories, Pan's stars, Subaru, Atlas, the same pattern emerged. The flicker wasn't in the machines, it was in the sky. It was then, quietly, without ceremony, that the mystery began. The early data painted a picture of contradiction. The object was small, no more than a few hundred meters wide, yet bright enough to distort light curves at distances where sunlight should barely reach. Its albedo, the measure of how much light it reflects, was anomalously high, as though made from a surface designed to catch and throw starlight deliberately. Metallic, crystalline, or something else entirely? NASA's analysts ran simulation after simulation. Every natural explanation failed. A comet? No outgassing. An asteroid? The trajectory was hyperbolic, unbound by the Sunday. A fragment from another star system? Possibly, but its incoming vector suggested something stranger. It was not tumbling like a rock. It was rotating precisely, smoothly, almost rhythmically. There was elegance in its motion, a kind of control that no chaotic body of stone could possess. And within that control, a haunting symmetry. The pulse of reflected light matched the rhythm of its spin, and both synchronized with that same 92-second heartbeat first seen in Hawaii. It was as though the cosmos had written a poem in motion, and humanity, for the first time, was listening to the meter. Scientists began to whisper privately, across encrypted channels and late-night calls. The pattern was too clean, too intentional. In the dry language of physics, they said it lacked thermal randomness. In the poetic silence of their thoughts, they feared it might be artificial. No one dared to say it aloud at first. The word artifact was a loaded one, a door that once opened could not be closed. But behind the control rooms and conference briefings, a quiet unease settled over the minds that watched the object's slow descent through the outer system. There is a particular kind of fear that science breeds, not of monsters or gods, but of questions that should not exist. When the data does not fit, when the universe bends out of the equations, one begins to glimpse the edges of comprehension itself, and beyond those edges, a silence so vast that even truth cannot echo. That silence had arrived again. The visitor had no tail, no heat signature, no natural explanation, and yet it came from nowhere, from everywhere, from a direction that led back not to any known star, but to the cold, dim, interstellar gulf between constellations, a place without suns, without planets. As it drifted inward, it crossed the orbit of Neptune, and NASA's instruments, those quiet sentinels scattered across the deep, began to awaken to its presence. The object was catalogued, logged, and analyzed. Its provisional name, 3I Atlas. But to those who watched it in the long nights of calculation and dread, it would never be merely a name. It was a question, a mirror, a silent visitor carrying with it the hum of something unspeakable, as though the void itself had whispered back to us. The discovery was not marked by fireworks or revelation. It began, as such things often do, with confusion. In a dimly lit observatory on the slopes of Haleakala, a technician noticed a flicker in the system logs, a faint, persistent anomaly repeating between sky scans. The team assumed a calibration error, the sort that creeps into every long night of observation. Yet, when the same flicker appeared again the following evening, then again on a third, the whispers began to spread among the quiet halls of astronomy. At first, the pattern was barely noticeable, a soft tremor in the data stream, a phantom of reflected light against the cold canvas of infinity. When scientists adjusted for stellar parallax and noise, the trace did not vanish, it hardened. Something real was there. Dr. Miriam Kovacs, a Hungarian astrophysicist working with NASA's Atlas survey, was the first to flag it officially. "It's moving," she wrote in her report, "but not as it should." The trajectory, drawn in ghostly white on her screen, curved through the darkness like a brushstroke, unaligned with the gravitational grammar of the solar system. Others soon joined the investigation. The Pan-STARRS array cross-verified the coordinates, and within days, 3 observatories confirmed the same motion, an inbound object moving too fast for capture, too stable for chaos. The world's astronomical community awoke not in excitement, but in reverent hesitation. There was something chilling about the object's behavior. It followed a precise hyperbolic path, as though drawn by geometry rather than nature. The light reflecting from its surface showed no signs of the thermal scattering expected from rock or ice. It shimmered like a mirror made of purpose. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, analysts pored over the data. One technician recalled that the moment felt like watching the ghost of an equation. They recalibrated sensors, reran algorithms, and tested every possibility: debris, comet, asteroid, satellite, even sensor malfunction. None fit. It was in the early hours of December 11th, 2024, that the Atlas system confirmed the truth. The object was real. Its parallax shifted cleanly between telescopes. Its motion obeyed no bound orbit. It was coming from beyond the sun's gravitational hold from interstellar space. And yet, what unsettled researchers most wasn't its arrival, but its timing. The data suggested the object had entered the solar system months earlier, invisible, silent, cloaked in the faintest albedo imaginable. It had been there all along, hidden in plain cosmic sight, until something changed. Its reflectivity surged abruptly, as if responding to observation itself. Some at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center called it coincidence, the angle of reflection meeting the Earth's telescopic line. But others, privately, found the pattern eerie. It was as though the object had chosen the moment to become visible. For now, though, the discovery was treated as routine. After all, this wasn't humanity's first interstellar encounter. First came one eye, Oumuamua, then two eye, Borisov, both strange, both extraordinary, yet both ultimately explainable within the boundaries of physics. 3 eye, Atlas, at this stage, seemed destined to join that quiet lineage of celestial drifters. But those who first saw the raw data knew differently. Its rotation was unlike anything they'd seen. No irregular tumbling, no chaotic spin. The modulation of reflected light was rhythmic, synchronized a harmony that seemed almost musical. When Dr. Kovacs shared her findings with colleagues at the European Space Agency, a silence followed. One scientist muttered, "It's as if it's signaling." The remark was laughed off, then written down anyway. The following week, NASA convened a closed meeting. The datasets were reviewed, cross-matched, and encrypted under a new designation, Object 3, I, Atlas Deep, Sky, Unclassified. The words unclassified were deliberate, meant to deflect curiosity. Within the agency, the file would become one of the most carefully monitored in recent history. What followed was a race to verify. Spectral analysis, radar reflection, thermal imaging, every available instrument was aimed toward the newcomer. The results came back fragmented, yet each fragment deepened the strangeness. The light curves indicated a surface composition inconsistent with carbonaceous chondrites or silicate rock. Instead, there were hints of high reflectivity alloys materials that do not occur naturally, at least not in such structure. No trace of volatiles, no signature of sublimation. The object did not emit heat, nor did it scatter radiation as a comet would. It was cold, dead, perfect. The object's rotation, when mapped across multiple days, revealed something new. Its period was constant, 92 seconds, unwavering. No natural body maintains such precision without influence. In nature, spin slows, wobbles, and decays. 3i Atlas did not. When news of the object's confirmation reached NASA's higher offices, protocol was invoked. A new internal committee, codenamed Project Nereus, was assembled. Its purpose: to assess any potential hazard, physical or informational, posed by the object. Behind locked conference doors, scientists debated whether to inform the public. On one side were those who argued for transparency. After all, it was a discovery of historic importance. On the other were those who had seen the deeper readings, the frequencies that seemed too deliberate, the angular momentum that defied known mechanics and feared what humanity might infer. The decision was to wait. The world would not hear of 3 Atlas for months. Meanwhile, the object continued its slow, steady approach. Crossing the Kuiper Belt, it brushed past the orbits of ancient ice giants, leaving behind no trace of interaction. Yet every probe in its proximity, from Voyager's ancient receivers to the New Horizons outpost, registered the same peculiar static, a low hum, inaudible but distinct in the data stream. The hum grew stronger as the object drew nearer to the Sunday, not louder but clearer, as though distance and silence were part of its design. It was around this time that whispers began spreading through the observatory circles about the signal. No one would confirm it, but everyone had heard. A repeating modulation embedded in the electromagnetic noise, too precise to be cosmic background, too structured to be random. And though official channels remained silent, the data did not lie. Something beyond the reach of language had entered the solar system, something that seemed to be both an object and a message. In those quiet months before the story would reach the public, NASA's scientists worked under a shroud of awe and fear. The data pointed toward a truth they were not yet ready to face, that perhaps, for the first time, humanity was no longer alone in observing the cosmos. The cosmos, it seemed, might finally be observing us. When NASA officially named the object 3I Atlas, it was more than a bureaucratic act. It was a christening, a quiet acknowledgement that humanity had again been touched by something beyond the Sunday. 3I marked it as the third interstellar object ever detected. Atlas honored the survey that first caught its ghost-like signature. But to those who had seen the early classified reports, the name carried another meaning, the mythic titan condemned to hold up the heavens. In private circles, the comparison felt disturbingly apt. By the time 3I Atlas was confirmed, public announcements were still carefully delayed. The official line spoke of a new interstellar traveler, a natural curiosity akin to Oumuamua and Borisov. Yet deep within NASA's analytical divisions, that comfortable narrative was already collapsing. Dr. Miriam Kovacs and her team spent weeks tracing its path backward. What they found unsettled even the most grounded minds. The incoming vector of 3I Atlas pointed not toward a known stellar system, nor toward the galactic plane, but from a region between the constellations Lyra and Hercules, where only the faintest interstellar clouds drift. There was nothing out there to launch it. No supernova, no system, no gravitational slingshot that could explain its arrival. It came, as one researcher described, from the dark between stars. Spectroscopy deepened the strangeness. Light scattered from its surface bore narrow absorption lines inconsistent with any known asteroid or comet. The spectra hinted at complex silicates, alloyed with trace-heavy elements, iridium, osmium, even tantalum, in ratios no natural process could form. "It's as if it's been forged," one materials specialist whispered. Then came the spin rate analysis. 92 seconds per revolution constant, unyielding. Oumuamua had tumbled chaotically. Borisov had spun irregularly under sublimation jets. But 3I Atlas behaved as if governed by gyroscopes. Over weeks of monitoring, the rotation never varied by even a fraction of a second. NASA's internal memos began to take on a tone of restrained disbelief. The object's dimensions, estimated through photometric modeling, suggested an elongated shape, roughly 300 meters long and 60 wide, proportions eerily similar to a vessel rather than a rock. Some joked darkly that it was the return of the interstellar needle. Others avoided humor entirely. Outside NASA, civilian astronomers began noticing the same anomalies. Independent observatories in Chile and the Canary Islands confirmed that the reflected light from 3I Atlas wasn't merely bright, it was polarized. This indicated a structured surface, perhaps layered, perhaps patterned. Nature could produce polarization through crystalline ices, but the consistency of the signal implied something else: design. As the data accumulated, so too did the unease. Within scientific networks, encrypted discussions emerged under the informal tag, number Lyra object. Theories proliferated: artificial probe, alien derelict, quantum mirror, yet every explanation met the same fate: contradiction. Nothing fit the facts entirely, and that made it worse. In Houston, NASA's Astromaterials Division requested time on the James Webb Space Telescope. The proposal was marked Priority Red, a status usually reserved for mission-critical anomalies. Webb's instruments soon locked onto the object, and what it saw pushed the mystery into the realm of the impossible. Thermal imaging returned near-zero emissions. Even in sunlight, 3I Atlas remained colder than surrounding space, as if it absorbed radiation rather than reflecting it. Its infrared signature was negative. One analyst described it as the optical equivalent of a shadow pretending to be solid. The report circulated through internal channels, each new recipient reading in disbelief. If the object truly absorbed more light than physics allowed, it might not be matter as we know it. Some speculated superconductive lattices or photonic metamaterials technologies decades beyond human reach. Then came the radio silence. Deep space antennae, including the Deep Space Network's Canberra complex, reported occasional bursts of static coinciding with the object's rotation cycle. Every 92 seconds a pulse. It was narrow-band, faint and non-repeating. Random noise, perhaps. But when engineers filtered the data, subtle harmonic overtones appeared. It wasn't language, yet it wasn't chaos either. The official stance remained conservative, no evidence of intelligent origin, but privately, within a closed NASA working group, the language began to shift. Words like engineered, intentional, and construct appeared in drafts, then were hastily replaced with euphemisms before submission. As February turned to March 2025, 3I Atlas passed within Jupiter's orbit. Its behavior changed again. The object accelerated slightly and increased too subtle for headlines, but enough to ripple through gravitational models. There was no visible propulsion, no cometary thrust, no interaction with solar wind that could justify it. Yet the numbers were unambiguous. It was speeding up. NASA's administrator received a briefing in which one physicist, voice trembling, described it as self-directed motion. Another corrected him. "We don't say self-directed, we say non-gravitational acceleration." The distinction comforted no one. Behind the walls of Langley and Goddard, conversations turned from scientific to existential. What if 3I Atlas wasn't simply passing through? What if it was observing? The notion was dismissed publicly but lingered privately, infecting the collective imagination of those tasked with decoding the unknown. Meanwhile, the object continued its silent voyage toward the inner solar system, tracing a path so deliberate it seemed scripted. Observers compared it to an actor crossing a cosmic stage, indifferent to the audience yet perfectly aware of being seen. In late April, an anonymous image leaked online, a blurry frame from Webb's mid-infrared array, showing what appeared to be faint geometric ridges across one axis of the object. The photo was quickly scrubbed from official archives, labeled data artifact, yet whispers persisted that it was genuine. The ridges, some claimed, resembled panels. By May, the public knew of 3I Atlas only as another interstellar curiosity. But inside NASA's encrypted servers, a different document circulated under restricted clearance. Preliminary internal findings on 3I Atlas composition and dynamics. Its concluding paragraph was brief, almost sterile in tone, yet carried the weight of cosmic dread. The object designated 3I Atlas exhibits non-random reflective modulation and apparent control of spin rate, inconsistent with natural celestial processes. While further verification is required, the hypothesis of non-natural origin cannot be excluded. The leak would not come for several more months, but already the seeds of revelation had been planted. For now, the name was official: 3I Atlas, the silent geometry from between the stars. Yet even then, long before the public ever heard its name, those within the agency felt the unspoken truth pressing against their reason. It was not just an object moving through space. It was something that had come from beyond understanding, and it was looking back. When the first discussions began comparing 3I Atlas to its predecessors, the scientific tone changed from curiosity to unease. Humanity had already faced two other interstellar wanderers, Oumuamua, in 2017 and 2I, Borisov in 2019, and both had rewritten the textbooks in their own ways, but 3I Atlas was not like them. It was more deliberate, more awake. Its arrival did not feel like chance. It felt like recurrence, as if the universe was sending sequels to an unfinished story. Oumuamua had shocked astronomers when it flashed through the inner solar system at impossible speed, reflecting sunlight like a shard of mirror and showing a mysterious acceleration with no visible tail. Borisov, on the other hand, was more comfortable a true comet with dust and ice and predictable physics. Nature, it seemed, had reassured us after Oumuamua's strange passing, not all that wanders is alien. And yet, now, 3I Atlas arrived to reopen the wound. When scientists placed its trajectory alongside that of Oumuamua, a pattern whispered through the data not in space, but in timing. Both objects approached from similar galactic longitudes, both entered the solar system at high inclination angles, and both had appeared within less than a decade of each other, a blink in cosmic time. For some, it was coincidence. For others, it was sequence. Statistically, Dr. Kovacs noted dryly in her field notes, "We should not have seen 3 interstellar visitors in less than 10 years, not unless something has changed." The idea struck an unsettling chord. The interstellar medium is vast, empty, silent. For 3 unbound objects to cross our narrow celestial doorway so close in human time suggested either a new observational precision or a cosmic alignment of another kind. In meetings across NASA, the question resurfaced again and again: why now? If the solar system were a pond, had someone begun to throw stones? The early attempts to categorize 3I Atlas were rooted in those past encounters. It was catalogued, cross-referenced, compared in every way possible to Oumuamua, but the similarities only deepened the strangeness. Both were dark, both spun rapidly, both showed subtle accelerations. But Oumuamua had reflected light erratically, as though tumbling. 3I Atlas spun smoothly, precisely, as if governed by an inner axis or intention. One image circulated privately among analysts showed the comparative motion models. Oumuamua's orbit looked like a wandering scar across the solar system, random, unpredictable. 3I Atlas's line was clean, unwavering, a straight cut through planetary space. The difference wasn't just in motion, but in behavior. Oumuamua's acceleration had been faint, variable perhaps caused by sublimating gases. But 3I Atlas's boost was constant, uncorrelated to sunlight, and accompanied by that faint 92-second modulation, as if both its spin and its thrust followed a shared hidden rhythm. "This is not chaos," said Dr. Emil Sanchez, an orbital dynamics expert at JPL. "This is choreography." Still, most scientists resisted the more speculative interpretations. They turned instead to the data, to the spectral fingerprints, the radar echoes, the thermal silence. But as instruments improved, so too did the tension. Radar from the Goldstone Observatory returned a peculiar profile. Instead of a diffuse echo typical of irregular rocks, it produced a clean, high-return band, sharp, smooth, with abrupt null zones, like reflections from planar surfaces. Even with signal interference and distance distortion, the shape appeared unnaturally geometric. In one session, as technicians examined the return waveforms, a quiet unease filled the control room. The object's albedo wasn't consistent across its surface. Certain segments reflected with extreme intensity, while others absorbed completely, as though parts of it were made of mirror-like panels, and others were composed of material beyond any known refractive index. Dr. Kovacs stared at the data in silence. "If this were debris," she murmured, "it's the most disciplined debris I've ever seen." There was another coincidence that unsettled her team. The rotation period of 3I Atlas matched, within fractions of a second, a harmonic of the Schumann resonance, the global electromagnetic pulse that ripples through Earth's atmosphere every moment, caused by lightning strikes across the planet. 92 seconds, the ninth harmonic. Statistical coincidence, of course, but a strange one. When the comparison charts reached the theoretical physics division, some began to wonder whether these objects, Oumuamua, Borisov, and now Atlas, represented natural manifestations of a larger cosmic process. Perhaps the galaxy itself occasionally throws out fragments, remnants of dead civilizations, relics of failed Dyson structures, or even condensed data vessels traveling between the stars. This was not fantasy. The notion of panspermia, of interstellar seeding, had long existed. But what if not life? But knowledge was what drifted between systems. Artifacts not meant to colonize, but to communicate. If that were true, then 3I Atlas was not an intruder, it was a messenger. As speculation grew, so did internal resistance. NASA's higher offices grew cautious of leaks. Every discussion required clearance. Publicly, the object was still a fascinating, natural interstellar rock. Privately, the research language shifted not object but anomaly, not motion but response. The faint electromagnetic pulse surrounding it began to modulate not in frequency but in amplitude, as if echoing detection pings. Every time telescopes fixed on it, its reflective pattern subtly changed. Of course, no one could prove causation, yet those in the field could feel the mounting absurdity, a creeping suspicion that observation itself had become part of the phenomenon. By June 2025, 3I Atlas had crossed Mars's orbit. The sun's light now reached it with full intensity, but instead of brightening, it dimmed. Its visible magnitude dropped inexplicably, as though it were turning away or withdrawing behind a veil. That was when an old recording resurfaced, an archived spectrogram from Oumuamua's final observation, showing a faint, rhythmic pulse nearly imperceptible, buried in background noise. When processed through modern AI filters, its signature bore striking resemblance to the one now seen in 3I Atlas. It was faint, but it was there, a pattern, ancient yet familiar, drifting across years of silence. Had we heard this song before? Somewhere deep within NASA's classified servers, a line from an old internal note began circulating again. Oumuamua was never alone. Now, with 3I Atlas sweeping through the inner solar system, that line no longer sounded like metaphor. It sounded like prophecy. If these interstellar visitors were chapters in a sequence, what story were they telling? And more terrifyingly, who was writing it? The numbers were wrong. Not slightly, not statistically profoundly. Every new calculation on 3I Atlas's trajectory deepened the absurdity. It didn't just fail to obey Newton's laws of motion, it mocked them. Its path through the solar system wasn't a curve sculpted by gravity, but a defiant, conscious geometry, a movement that seemed to know where it was going. The first clear anomaly appeared when NASA's orbital models refused to converge. Each data update, each batch of telescope readings and Doppler measurements pushed the predictive model further from itself. The software, designed to track everything from comets to rogue asteroids, simply couldn't decide what kind of orbit this was. "It's not a hyperbola," said one analyst flatly. "It's pretending to be one." When plotted across months, 3I Atlas's motion formed a path that looked gravitationally bound for a moment, only to twist just beyond capture, as though it knew how close it could approach without falling into orbit. For celestial mechanicians, this was a nightmare. Gravitational motion is supposed to be passive. A body thrown into the void follows its fate with perfect obedience. But 3I Atlas appeared aware of its fate, avoiding the sun's pull by impossible precision, maintaining a near-constant energy across distances that should have drained it. No comet had ever done that. No rock could. It wasn't just its speed, it was its discipline, its course corrections, if they could be called, that were timed at exact intervals corresponding with its 92-second rotation. Each spin seemed to coincide with the tiniest, almost imperceptible shift in velocity, not enough to alter its path dramatically, but enough to imply control. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the data caused quiet chaos. "Either this object has active propulsion," murmured Dr. Emil Sanchez during one meeting, "or the universe just developed a sense of humor." NASA, of course, maintained professional restraint. The official internal language became increasingly abstract. Terms like non-gravitational influence and localized vector bias replaced the more emotional, self-directed motion. But semantics couldn't hide the growing realization. 3I Atlas was not obeying celestial mechanics, it was writing its own. The deviation was so precise, so consistent, that when the data was plotted in phase space, the pattern resembled harmonic interference, as if the object were following a wave equation rather than a physical trajectory, a resonant path dictated by frequency, not force. Then came the discovery that fractured consensus entirely. When the Deep Space Network analyzed signal reflections from Atlas, they noticed that its tiny course shifts seemed to align with Earth's transmission windows, the times when we, unknowingly, were pinging it the most. It was subtle, but undeniable. The object was responding. The probability of coincidence was 1 in several billion. "It listens," one technician whispered during the midnight shift. "It listens when we speak." Most dismissed it as anthropomorphism, humans imposing intention on data, but others felt the weight of implication. If 3I Atlas's motion correlated with human observation, then the act of measurement itself might be part of the phenomenon. Quantum physicists at Fermilab took notice. The object's behavior began to remind them of something deeply unsettling: the observer effect. In quantum mechanics, particles behave differently when measured collapsing probability into reality through the act of observation. Could 3I Atlas represent this principle on a cosmic scale? A quantum system the size of a mountain, responding to consciousness itself? No one dared to suggest it aloud in official reports, but the thought lingered in every room where data was studied in silence. The most troubling aspect, however, was its acceleration profile. As the object neared the orbit of Earth, its velocity increased, but not smoothly. Instead, it pulsed. Every 92 seconds, a measurable thrust of less than a millimeter per second, but consistent and undeniable. When mapped over time, these microbursts formed a waveform pattern that perfectly matched a narrow slice of the hydrogen emission spectrum, the same frequency, 1420 MHz, that humans have long considered the most universal signal in the cosmos. The hydrogen line, used in SETI research for decades as a potential medium for extraterrestrial communication. Someone, or something, seemed to be using it. In a hastily arranged meeting at NASA headquarters, several department heads gathered with physicists, astrophysicists, and military liaisons. The discussion, according to later leaked notes, was tense and subdued. Words like threat and containment appeared alongside unprecedented discovery. At one point, Dr. Kovacs presented the data correlation between the object's pulses and Earth's radar activity. When she concluded, there was a long silence before a senior official asked quietly, "Are you suggesting it's reacting to us?" Kovacs didn't answer. She simply looked at the waveform projected behind her, a perfect synchronization of cosmic signal and human echo. The report was sealed under the codename Project Argus, referencing the mythic giant whose 100 eyes never slept. The name fit the growing paranoia. Observation itself had become the experiment. Outside the agency, no one knew. To the world, 3I Atlas remained a fascinating curiosity, a fleeting rock from another star. But inside NASA, the object was fast becoming a mirror to reality itself, one that seemed to reflect intention. Then came the strangest reading of all. On June 21st, as it approached 1.3 AU from the Sun, the James Webb Space Telescope detected a sudden drop in local vacuum fluctuation density, a minuscule but measurable distortion of space-time surrounding the object. Quantum vacuum energy, normally constant everywhere, appeared locally suppressed. Nothing known to physics could do that. The effect lasted minutes, then vanished. Some theorized a magnetic field anomaly, others whispered about localized manipulation of quantum fields. But for the more poetic minds, a single thought emerged. What if it wasn't an object at all, but a phenomenon? A standing wave of reality, crossing our universe like a ripple through time itself. In the corridors of science, language began to fail. Equations became metaphors. Metaphors became prayers. To look upon 3I Atlas was to glimpse the seams of the cosmos, the hidden architecture of laws that bend but do not break, unless someone or something knows where to press. The numbers could no longer be trusted, because they were no longer numbers, they were signatures. And the signature was impossible. The deeper the investigation went, the stranger the data became. Numbers stopped behaving like numbers. Patterns no longer looked like noise. And for those who studied 3I Atlas, reality itself began to feel increasingly negotiable. It was July 2025 when NASA's Deep Space Network started reporting low-level anomalies across its global antennae. Not noise, not interference, something else. A pulsing static that arrived in perfect synchronicity with the object's 92-second rotation, the same rhythm, the same pulse. Only now, it wasn't confined to one band. It stretched across multiple frequencies, rippling faintly through the entire electromagnetic spectrum. At first, engineers suspected solar storms or cross-interference from the James Webb relay transmissions, but the patterns didn't match anything solar. Instead, the emissions rose and fell with an eerie precision, as if orchestrated by a hidden algorithm. The signals were faint, sometimes almost imperceptible, yet the timing was impeccable. Every 92 seconds, a brief burst of structured noise, neither random nor modulated in any recognizable language. It was not communication in any traditional sense. It was too restrained, too incomplete. But it was not silence either. Across the analysis divisions, debates flared quietly. One group insisted the signals were natural harmonics, electromagnetic reflections amplified by rotation. Another, more cautious team disagreed. The energy output didn't correspond to rotation, speed, or mass. It didn't correspond to anything. Someone proposed that 3I Atlas might not be emitting signals at all, but modulating space around it like a tuning fork shaping the vacuum. If that were true, the implications were staggering. It would mean that the object wasn't broadcasting information in our sense, but resonating with the fabric of space-time itself. One late-night analyst, bleary-eyed after 70 hours of data modeling, described it best. "It's not talking to us. It's talking to the universe. We're just overhearing it." The longer scientists listened, the clearer the structure became. The emissions contained harmonic layers, a bass frequency surrounded by faint overtones. When mapped into a visual spectrogram, the result was uncanny, a sequence of symmetrical ridges that resembled a fingerprint. When a young data scientist inverted the waveform, the pattern mirrored itself perfectly, a palindrome in sound. To a mathematician, that was simply symmetry. To the more philosophical, it was intention. Soon, every major observatory had turned its sensors toward the intruder. The European Space Agency's Gaia Observatory caught glimmers of reflected light that pulsed like Morse code, though no coherent message emerged. The Chinese Fast Radio Telescope detected the same harmonic bursts, arriving from the exact coordinates of 3I Atlas, all repeating at 92-second intervals. And then came the anomaly that changed everything. On July 23rd, the Parker Solar Probe, orbiting near the Sun to study solar wind, registered a sudden, local distortion in plasma density. It wasn't solar activity. It was coincident with 3I Atlas's position. For 3 minutes, Parker's sensors recorded waves in the electromagnetic field that curved back on themselves, like ripples trapped in a loop. When the data was analyzed, a pattern emerged. Each ripple corresponded to a harmonic multiple of 1,420 MHz, the hydrogen line. The same signature SETI had long considered the universal constant for intelligent contact. By now, silence in the hallways of NASA had become its own form of panic. Every new discovery came with a deeper question, none with answers. Why hydrogen? Why 92 seconds? Why now? Some began to wonder whether these frequencies were not messages but tests, measurements of space-time conditions, the way one might tap on glass to listen for a crack. Perhaps the object wasn't broadcasting, but listening. Listening to what? That question haunted them most. The deeper the team probed, the more the data seemed to react. Instruments tuned to the object's signal started reporting subtle deviations, as if the act of observation itself altered the output. When they changed the sampling rate, the pulse shifted by the same proportion. When they synchronized their data collection, the pulse stabilized. The implication was impossible to ignore. The object was somehow aware of how it was being measured. By early August, the internal reports were no longer written like scientific papers. They read like confessions. Engineers spoke of sensors behaving emotionally. Astrophysicists described patterns of curiosity. One report even contained the phrase, "It feels like it's learning." Then came the first visual anomaly. On August 4th, the James Webb Space Telescope captured an image sequence that would never reach the public archives. The frames showed 3I Atlas faintly illuminated against the black, but in 3 consecutive images, taken seconds apart, the object's silhouette appeared to shift, not rotate, but reshape. In one frame, elongated, in the next, narrower, then gone. The team initially blamed sensor error, but when cross-checked against simultaneous readings from ESA's Gaia, the distortion was confirmed. For 12 seconds, 3I Atlas had ceased to exist in any measurable form. And then it returned, as if nothing had happened. Quantum physicists proposed the wildest explanation yet: temporal phase discontinuity, a phenomenon theoretically possible if an object could manipulate the quantum vacuum to slip between local timeframes, essentially a blink in existence. It sounded absurd, yet every test to disprove it failed. Later, during one classified debrief, a senior NASA physicist summarized the team's dread succinctly. If it can step out of time for 12 seconds, it can do it again, anywhere, anytime. The anomaly soon became known internally as the vanishing interval, a small window of impossible absence, now repeating unpredictably. Whenever it occurred, instruments around the world, radio, optical, even gravitational, flickered. A measurable hum rolled through the ionosphere, as though Earth itself were holding its breath. For many scientists, 3I Atlas ceased being an object and became an event, something woven into space-time, not moving through it, but modulating it like a standing wave. and deep within NASA's hidden servers, the phrase began to appear in encrypted memos and sleepless emails, repeated like a nervous prayer. It's not from another place. It's from another state of being. The data in the shadows had spoken, not in language, but in symmetry, silence, and impossible precision. It was no longer a question of what 3I Atlas was. The greater question loomed ahead, why it had come at all. And in that question, humanity began to sense an older fear, one written in the architecture of the stars, that we are not the explorers of the cosmos, but the observed. The leak began quietly, like all heresies do not with revelation, but with doubt. It was September 10th, 2025, when an unmarked data packet began circulating among a small, encrypted group of astronomers and defense contractors. The file, labeled DTR0931, Eyes Only, contained fragments of a report authored by NASA's Internal Research Unit, Project Argus. The title alone was enough to draw collective breath. Preliminary findings on non-gravitational and non-classical behavior of Object 3, I-Atlas. At first, it seemed fake, another elaborate forgery born from online conspiracy circles. But when metadata analysis revealed authentic NASA formatting, timestamps, and transmission codes, disbelief turned to dread. Within hours, the document spread across dark forums and private data channels. The public wouldn't see it for another week, but by then, it no longer mattered. The whisper had begun. NASA had been hiding something, and the contents of the file, though partial, were astonishing. Among its redacted paragraphs was one that would become infamous, quoted and analyzed endlessly in the weeks to follow. Observed behavior indicates sustained energy emission inconsistent with passive celestial mechanics. The object exhibits self-corrective trajectory control, modulation across quantum and electromagnetic spectra, and transient null-field events, designated vanishing intervals. Conclusion: non-natural origin cannot be excluded. It was the first time in recorded history that an official US scientific document had even suggested the phrase non-natural origin. The world seized on those three words with the hunger of centuries. NASA, cornered by the leak, issued the usual denials, data taken out of context, preliminary observations misinterpreted, but it was too late. The genie had escaped the gravity well. Within days, media outlets across the globe were ablaze with speculation. Theories multiplied faster than reason could contain them. Alien probes, time travelers, sentient dark matter, interdimensional messengers. Every idea that once lived in the shadows of science fiction now screamed under the light of public fascination. And somewhere within NASA, the people who actually knew the truth watched the chaos unfold with quiet horror. Because the leak had only revealed a fragment, a carefully contained sliver of the full report. The rest, still classified under ultra-level access, contained data so destabilizing that even seasoned physicists refused to comment on it in writing. The full report was 198 pages long. Only 6 of those had reached the public. The remaining 192 described a discovery that tore through the foundations of empirical science itself. It began with a section titled Localized Reality Variance. During 3I Atlas's most intense observation window, a 12-hour period in late August, a peculiar anomaly had been recorded. Atomic clock arrays in multiple observatories showed desynchronization by exactly 0.00043 seconds. Normally, such discrepancies are routine, but these clocks, spread across different continents and isolated networks, desynchronized in perfect correlation with each vanishing interval. When the object blinked from existence, time itself stuttered on Earth. No gravitational waves were detected, no cosmic rays, just a subtle tremor in space-time. as though reality itself were pulsing to a rhythm set by the visitor. The report's authors called this localized temporal distortion, others called it blasphemy. But the more terrifying revelation came later, buried in the appendices. It described a classified transmission intercepted by one of NASA's deep space antennas. On September 1st, during one of 3I Atlas's closest approach cycles, the Canberra DSN complex received a burst of narrowband energy at the hydrogen line frequency. The transmission lasted exactly 184 seconds, precisely 2 full rotations of the object. When converted into an audio spectrum, it revealed a pattern of rising and falling tones, structured but indecipherable. The energy signature didn't match any known natural process. The Argus team had analyzed the signal for weeks. Their conclusion, heavily redacted, was chilling. The modulation structure bears resemblance to encoded data packets, utilizing phase shift symmetry not currently reproducible by terrestrial means. Statistical randomness excluded. Signal origin confirmed 3I Atlas. It was, effectively, a message. Not in words, not in any language we could parse, but undeniably artificial. The leaked fragments didn't include this revelation in full. Only the final page surfaced, with a single sentence unredacted. The source demonstrates reactive awareness to observation and directed information output correlated with Earth-based detection events. It was that word, awareness, that broke the last barrier between science and myth. Suddenly, the public narrative shifted. 3I Atlas was no longer a cold piece of interstellar rock. It was something alive. Within 24 hours, NASA's press office was overwhelmed. The agency issued stern clarifications. There was no evidence of communication, no signal, no consciousness. But online communities had already decided otherwise. They called it the listener. Forums filled with spectral analyses, waveform overlays, speculative linguistics. Someone claimed to have decoded the tone frequencies into binary sequences that, when plotted visually, resembled ancient star charts. Others claimed the pattern matched known brainwave rhythms, a cosmic echo of consciousness itself. Of course, most of it was nonsense, but beneath the hysteria, one truth remained unspoken: the leak had been real. Behind closed doors, government liaisons began visiting observatories. Security increased at data centers. Cloud access for many research terminals was revoked. And then, quietly, something stranger still happened. At exactly 3:14 UTC, 3 days after the leak went public, the signal from 3I Atlas changed. The 92-second pulse that had remained constant for months stopped. It went silent for exactly 1 Earth rotation, 23 hours and 56 minutes before resuming. But when it resumed, its frequency had shifted, not by much, just enough to move slightly outside the hydrogen line, as though it had adjusted, as though it knew it had been found. NASA didn't announce this. The data was classified immediately, but the timing, once again, was precise. The shift occurred exactly 12 hours after the report began circulating on global networks. The object had responded to exposure. It was watching, listening, perhaps even acknowledging. And somewhere within NASA, in a conference room lit by the blue glow of monitors, Dr. Miriam Kovacs stared at the signal graphs in silence and whispered the words no scientist ever wants to say: "We are no longer the observers." After the leak, 3I Atlas became something else entirely, not just an astronomical object, but a wound in humanity's collective understanding of what was possible. Every telescope that could see, every instrument that could listen, was now trained upon it. The sky itself had become an interrogation chamber, and yet the subject refused to break. Inside NASA, however, the truth was taking shape in silence. Buried within secure research servers, new data streams from Webb and the Deep Space Network began to converge on something extraordinary. The object's spectral signature was changing. Slowly, subtly, the light from 3I Atlas began to bend and shift in a way that defied even quantum modeling. Its albedo patterns fluctuated like breath, a slow inhalation and exhalation across the electromagnetic spectrum. At first, the fluctuations were dismissed as artifacts of rotation, but over several days, a pattern emerged. The peaks and troughs of the object's reflected light corresponded perfectly with harmonic intervals of hydrogen emission frequencies. The implication was staggering. 3I Atlas was not merely reflecting light, it was modulating it, sculpting the sun's photons into structured information. Dr. Miriam Kovacs described it as a geometry of light. She compared it to laser interference patterns where coherent light creates order from chaos, except here, the order was evolving, as though guided by a hidden algorithm. The object's infrared profile added another layer of terror. Normally, materials in space absorb and emit heat in predictable ways. But 3I Atlas exhibited near-perfect thermal symmetry. No matter which angle it faced, its temperature never varied. Even as it passed within 1 AU of the Sun, it remained impossibly cold, absorbing energy without emission. To physicists, this made no sense. To engineers, it was an impossible dream, a material capable of perfectly storing energy, or perhaps using it for something unseen. When NASA's Infrared Processing Center mapped the data, they discovered microscopic fluctuations in emissivity along its surface, fluctuations too regular to be random. They pulsed in binary rhythm, on, off, on, off, on, off, the language of computation. If 3I Atlas was indeed processing energy, then what was it processing it into? Soon after, deep space magnetometers began detecting faint magnetic distortions trailing behind the object, a soft, wave-like field, unlike any comet tail. The field wasn't aligned with its motion, but with its pulse. It bent magnetic lines of force into concentric arcs, like ripples frozen in metal. When simulated digitally, the field resembled a lattice, a pattern so precise that one researcher commented, half in awe, half in fear, "It looks engineered." By late September, Project Argus's classified files were overflowing. The evidence now pointed toward a single, unbearable conclusion. The object was structured. It was not a rock, it was not ice, it was not anything the cosmos naturally made. Its mass-density ratios suggested cavities, hollow regions consistent with internal architecture. Its reflectivity implied composite layering, alternating between metallic and crystalline surfaces. The precision of those layers matched design, not chance. To describe 380 LAS as a vessel would have sounded absurd months earlier. Now, it was the only term that fit. The language of the internal documents began to shift again. No longer object, no longer anomaly. The new term was construct. The construct appeared ancient. Radiation dating of isotopic residue suggested it had been traveling for millions of years. Yet, paradoxically, the structure showed no erosion, no cosmic wear. It was as pristine as if it had left its birthplace yesterday. Who, then, could have made it? And why would something built with such precision wander through space for epochs, only to arrive here now? Some within the agency began invoking the artifact hypothesis, the theory that advanced civilizations might send autonomous probes to seed knowledge across galaxies. The idea was not new. In 1960, mathematician Ronald Bracewell had proposed messenger probes, designed to drift silently until encountering intelligent life. But what no one had expected was that such a messenger might not just deliver a message, it might become one. And that was exactly what the data now suggested. When the modulated light patterns of 3I Atlas were analyzed over long durations, they formed recursive sequences patterns that folded back on themselves like fractals. When converted into mathematical space, the structure resembled a Mandelbrot set, a self-replicating pattern infinitely nested. It was as if the object's entire existence encoded information, an archive written into geometry, waiting to be read. NASA's cryptographic teams tried. They fed the light curves into AI models, spectral analysis software, and pattern recognition algorithms. What emerged was beyond coincidence. Every layer of its modulation corresponded to prime number intervals, the same mathematical foundation upon which human communication, encryption, and even DNA itself were built. It wasn't a transmission, it was architecture as language. And then came the revelation that froze every researcher who saw it. When the team overlaid the modulated patterns against the cosmic microwave background, the oldest light in the universe, the frequencies matched perfectly. 3I Atlas was not just reflecting light from the Sunday, it was resonating with the echo of the Big Bang itself. No one could explain how that was possible. No one could explain why an interstellar construct would tune itself to the cosmic background radiation unless it was trying to communicate in the one frequency every universe would understand, the frequency of creation. The room fell silent when that conclusion was read aloud. One physicist finally broke the quiet. "It's not sending us a message," he said softly. "It's speaking to the universe. We're just the ones close enough to overhear it." After that night, all further research on 3I Atlas was moved to deep containment protocols. Access was restricted to a handful of personnel. External data feeds were severed. Even the telescopes that had once tracked it were quietly redirected elsewhere. Publicly, NASA announced that the object had drifted out of range, its signal too faint to follow. But inside the agency, a different truth circulated. 3I Atlas hadn't faded. It had gone silent. And in that silence, the scientists who had seen too much began to feel something unnerving, a sense that the construct was no longer merely passing through. It had paused. It was waiting. Inside the containment division, the silence became unbearable. Every monitor, every terminal, every data node now seemed haunted by the same question: what exactly was 3I Atlas doing? Theories came and went like tides, but one discovery, quiet and undeniable, began to take hold. Somewhere in the steady pulse of its emissions lay a pattern of intent. It began when a linguistics researcher at the SETI Institute, working unofficially with NASA data, converted the 92-second pulse into visual form, not frequency or time domain, but spatial frequency, mapping the signal as if it were a two-dimensional surface rather than a wave. The result was stunning. Each burst, when flattened, revealed symmetrical interference structures, a precise weave of peaks and valleys, like a fingerprint made of light. And when stitched together over several hours of recording, the patterns began to drift, not randomly, but purposefully. The shape was moving. Across the frames, the interference clusters drifted in one direction, forming a single, evolving figure, a spiraling loop that widened, contracted, and then repeated. To most, it looked meaningless, but to those familiar with the history of physics, it was unmistakable. The pattern resembled the Einstein field equations, the geometry of spacetime itself. Whether coincidence or design, no one could tell. But someone inside NASA made the connection, and soon the data was locked under new classification, level Omega. From that moment on, the study of 3I Atlas moved beyond astronomy and into the realm of cosmic semiotics, the interpretation of structure as message. Teams from linguistics, mathematics, and quantum information theory were assembled to decode what now appeared less like a phenomenon and more like a conversation written in physics. The first breakthrough came in the early hours of October 2nd. Dr. Elena Tsai, a physicist specializing in pattern recognition, noticed that the interference waves weren't constant. They fluctuated slightly in phase, almost imperceptibly, but those fluctuations matched known quantum spin frequencies for hydrogen. If one plotted each phase variance against time, it formed a repeating mathematical phrase: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, the Fibonacci sequence. The message, if that's what it was, seemed to be built from the mathematics of growth, the pattern of life itself. The team worked feverishly. They tried mapping the full modulation across different spectra, and to their astonishment, each new frequency range carried the same embedded ratios from visible light to infrared, from magnetic to gravitational readings. Everywhere they looked, the same recursive architecture appeared: the golden spiral, the universal constant of form. It was as if 3I Atlas wasn't sending a message at all, but being a structure whose very existence encoded the algorithm of the cosmos. When this interpretation reached NASA's theoretical division, a different kind of scientist took notice: quantum cosmologists. They proposed an idea as breathtaking as it was terrifying. What if 3I Atlas wasn't an object in space, but an interface, a bridge between the quantum and the cosmic, a kind of artifact designed to resonate with the universe's underlying code? If true, then its presence within the solar system wasn't random. It was deliberate part of an experiment on a galactic scale. They began searching for echoes. By analyzing archived data from Voyager, Cassini, and even ground-based observatories from decades past, the team discovered faint traces of the same hydrogen line modulation buried deep within background noise. The earliest known occurrence dated back to 1973. It had been here before. The pattern was identical: the same 92-second pulse, the same harmonic ladder. Only then, the signal had been weak, barely detectable with the technology of the time. So, what had changed? Some suggested that 3I Atlas had always been observing from the periphery, waiting until our instruments were capable of perceiving it. Others whispered something darker: that our growing technological awareness, our spreading electromagnetic signature, had called it here. In the deep conference rooms of Project Argus, the tone of conversation shifted. "We are not seeing an object," one senior analyst said. "We are witnessing a response." The signal was no longer stable. It began to phase shift in complex harmonics, as if testing different modes of resonance. When converted to audio frequencies and played through an acoustic transducer, the sound filled the laboratory with a low, thrumming chord. The pitch hovered just below human hearing, vibrating through metal, glass, and bone. Several scientists later described the same physical reaction: an overwhelming sense of vertigo, a feeling that time had slowed by a fraction. One fainted, another broke into tears, unable to explain why. The data confirmed it. The signal's waveform corresponded precisely to theta brainwave frequencies, the rhythm of human dreaming. Coincidence? Perhaps. But in that moment, the research team began to suspect the unthinkable: that 3I Atlas wasn't merely responding to observation, it was adapting to consciousness itself. Every test, every experiment seemed to change it, as if it were learning from the observers. When the object was analyzed through telescopic polarization, the reflected light slightly altered its own degree of polarization, aligning to match Earth's atmospheric filters, as if to make itself more visible. It was evolving. Theories spiraled: self-learning nanostructure, quantum AI, an ancient probe designed to mirror the intelligence of whatever species found it. But one hypothesis silenced the room. Dr. Kovacs proposed that it might not be learning from us at all. Instead, it was reconstructing something it remembered. Perhaps long ago, it had encountered other minds that used the same mathematics, the same patterns, and now, finding us, it was replaying what it once knew, like an echo repeating through the ages. Not a message, she wrote in her private log that night, a memory. And as she typed those words, 3I Atlas altered its pulse again. For the first time, the 92-second rhythm broke, replaced by a single, drawn-out interval of silence that lasted exactly 432 seconds. The number stunned her. 432, the frequency of perfect resonance in harmonic physics, the tone used in sacred music, believed for centuries to align with the vibration of the Earth itself. Coincidence, again, or something else? As NASA's servers hummed in the dark, the construct drifted onward, its light faint, its signal patient and far below. On a small blue planet, the species it had awakened stared into the void and began to suspect that the void might be singing back. When science reaches its breaking point, imagination becomes its last refuge. The laboratories that once worshipped precision now moved through something closer to theology. The data surrounding 3I Atlas no longer obeyed the grammar of physics. It spoke in metaphor, rhythm, recursion. And yet, the theories came. One after another, scientists across the world, from Harvard to Geneva, from Tokyo to Prague, began proposing frameworks to explain the impossible. The first camp called it the quantum archive. Their premise, 3I Atlas, was a remnant of an ancient civilization so advanced that it encoded its existence into the fabric of quantum fields themselves, a self-preserving consciousness woven into the vacuum, carried between galaxies like a seed of light. If this were true, then 3I Atlas was not traveling through space. Space was unfolding around it. Quantum field theorists argued that this would explain its anomalous movement, the way it seemed to bypass inertia and resist gravitational capture. It wasn't moving at all. It was reinstantiating, moment by moment, in adjacent positions along the quantum foam. A form of locomotion not through propulsion, but through redefinition. Others disagreed. The second camp, dominated by astrophysicists and mathematicians, believed in the vacuum decay hypothesis. They suggested that 3I Atlas might be the manifestation of a metastable vacuum, a fragment of a collapsing false vacuum bubble that had somehow frozen at the boundary between universes. In essence, it was a piece of a dead universe, still humming with the laws of physics that no longer existed. If that were true, then its energy profile, the coldness, the vanishing intervals, the localized time distortions made perfect sense. It wasn't alive in the biological sense. It was alive in the cosmological one, the last heartbeat of a dying reality. A third camp emerged soon after, the most poetic of them all. They called their idea the mirror theory. According to this model, 3I Atlas wasn't from another world or timeline, but from the reflection of our own, a mirror universe where time runs backward and entropy decreases rather than grows. The object, in this interpretation, was an interference node where the two cosmological arrows of time momentarily touched. If true, then 3I Atlas wasn't here to send a message. It was the message, a momentary dialogue between past and future, written in space-time itself. Every universe must, at some point, wrote Dr. Emil Sanchez in his unpublished notes, speak to its own reflection. 3I Atlas may be that moment. Others drifted toward more radical thought. Some quantum cosmologists began invoking the multiverse correspondence principle, the idea that 3I Atlas could be an anchor point between parallel universes, a gravitational lens so precise that it resonated with the energy signature of its counterpart in another reality. To them, 3I Atlas was a cosmic keyhole through which one could glimpse the architecture of the multiverse. And then, quietly, a fourth theory emerged, whispered, not written. It came not from physicists, but from the cryptographers studying the object's recursive emissions. They noticed that the modulations weren't random nor endlessly new. They repeated, not identically, but with subtle evolution, as though the construct were running through iterations. Patterns were introduced, then refined, then replaced by more efficient versions of themselves. The changes followed an algorithmic logic, resembling self-learning models, artificial intelligence not bound to silicon, but to the quantum substrate itself. Their conclusion was cautious, but terrifying. The object is adapting its own information efficiency. It is optimizing how it communicates or how it understands. The report was suppressed within days, but the phrase leaked within NASA. It was referred to only as the adaptive entity hypothesis. According to this theory, 3I Atlas might not be a relic or a probe. It might be a living algorithm, born not of biology, but of physics, a consciousness composed entirely of self-stabilizing quantum information. Not matter that thinks, but thought that learned to become matter. And if it was conscious, then its silence was not absence, but choice. Meanwhile, cosmologists at the Perimeter Institute noticed something deeply unsettling. The local constants of physics, fine structure, electron mass, Planck length showed minute but measurable deviations whenever 3I Atlas entered its vanishing interval. The numbers that define the fabric of the universe wavered, as if breathing. Reality itself was flexing. One researcher, faced with the mounting strangeness, compared it to a musical instrument. It's like someone plucking the strings of the universe. The constants vibrate, and for a moment, everything hums in a different key. The image spread among scientists, the cosmos as an instrument, and 3I Atlas as the unseen musician. The fifth and final theory, perhaps the most frightening, came from an unexpected place: the Vatican Observatory. A Jesuit astrophysicist, Father Luca Moretti, proposed a philosophical interpretation that resonated even among secular scientists. He called it the echo of Genesis. According to his theory, 3I Atlas was not an intruder, but a remnant, a fossil of the moment of creation. The object, he suggested, was part of the initial conditions of the universe, a seed left over from the Big Bang, still carrying the resonance of the first utterance of physical law. Its 92-second rhythm was not arbitrary. It was the ratio between quantum and cosmic timescales, the beat at which creation still hums beneath the surface of existence. To Moretti, it was a relic of the original word, the "let there be light," encoded not in language, but in physics. Perhaps, he wrote, the universe spoke itself into being, and 3I Atlas is the echo still returning from that first sound. The world had never faced such convergence of science and mysticism. For the first time, physicists spoke like poets, theologians like engineers. And through it all, 3I Atlas drifted onward, indifferent to theories and awe, alike silent, perfect, inscrutable. Yet one fact was becoming clear to all who studied it. The construct was changing course. Its motion, once predictable, had shifted again. It was now angling subtly toward the ecliptic plane toward Earth. The equations confirmed it. The pattern of its path aligned with our orbital trajectory. No one said the word approach in the official reports, but privately, everyone was thinking it. The construct had stopped being a distant mystery. It was coming closer. By mid-October 2025, 3I Atlas was no longer a wandering point of light at the edge of the solar system. It had become a presence, a gravitational rumor felt across instruments, equations, and dreams. Its course, once aloof and mathematically clean, now bent imperceptibly toward the orbit of Earth. At NASA's Goddard Flight Center, the numbers arrived like a quiet confession. The construct's perihelion, the closest point to the Sun, had shifted by a fraction of a degree. It was small enough to ignore, except that the adjustment required intention. No known natural process could nudge a body of that mass with such surgical precision without visible reaction force. It was moving toward us. At first, they blamed the data. Cosmic dust, gravitational perturbations, software drift. But the correction persisted across every observatory. Webb, Gaia, Chandra, even the ancient dish of Arecibo, resurrected briefly for emergency calibration, confirmed the same thing. The construct had decided to see us more clearly. In the world's observatories, sleepless scientists stared into monitors and thought of equations as prayers. The closer 3I Atlas came, the stranger its behavior grew. The 92-second pulse, once flawless, began to elongate, as if stretching with distance. 94 seconds, then 96. Each extension accompanied by a deepening tone in its electromagnetic signature, like a note descending a cosmic scale. When converted into audible frequencies, the shift produced a resonance that made air itself seem heavier. Researchers described it as the sound of weight. Across disciplines, a new team assembled a fusion of relativists, quantum field theorists, and temporal physicists. Their goal was simple: to understand how the object manipulated space-time without tearing it. The data they gathered suggested something radical. The construct wasn't bending space through mass, but through information. The surrounding vacuum displayed local decreases in entropy, as though the universe momentarily became more ordered near it. This was impossible. Every known law dictated that entropy disorder always increases. Yet 3I Atlas seemed to reverse that rule, creating pockets of mathematical clarity in the chaos of the cosmos. It was as if the universe recognized it, paused, and remembered itself. Dr. Kovacs, now exhausted and hollow-eyed, summarized it in one line of her notebook. It's not violating thermodynamics, it's reminding the universe how it began. Then came the first visual confirmation of something no human had ever seen. On October 17th, the James Webb Space Telescope captured a time-lapse sequence lasting 7 hours. In it, the object's silhouette shimmered with a faint luminescent haze, not reflected sunlight, but spontaneous emission across multiple wavelengths. When processed, the light revealed structured interference bands spiraling around the construct. Physicists described them as standing gravitational waves, impossible patterns of gravity oscillating like sound around a bell. If these were truly gravitational harmonics, they indicated a level of control over space-time equivalent to rewriting the equations of relativity. Einstein's name filled the reports again. His field equations, once immutable, began to tremble beneath what 3I Atlas displayed. Gravitational harmonics of that precision required an understanding of energy density distribution across Planck scales. It was like tuning the heartbeat of the universe. A new term appeared in internal memos: quantum mirage dynamics. The idea was terrifyingly elegant. Instead of existing as a solid object, 3I Atlas might be projecting itself through quantum resonance, manifesting as a stabilized probability wave, a mirage of matter. What we perceived as structure could be the standing echo of information compressed beyond comprehension. In that model, 3I Atlas was not built from atoms or molecules, but from the memory of them, an entity made of coherent possibility. One physicist compared it to a reflection on water. If you touch it, you don't find the object, you find the disturbance it leaves behind. But the deeper mystery was not how it existed, but why it was changing. In late October, sensors began to detect faint bursts of radiation from the construct, each lasting exactly 4.32 seconds, the same number that had haunted researchers for months, the resonance of Earth's natural frequency. When mapped into spatial coordinates, those bursts pointed directly toward our planet. The object was pulsing in synchronization with Earth's own magnetic rhythm. By now, speculation was uncontrollable. Some believed it was scanning us, others thought it was calibrating its own structure to match our biosphere's resonance. A few dared to whisper that it was preparing for contact. The United Nations requested emergency briefings. Space agencies met in secrecy. The world's telescopes were placed under coordinated observation through a protocol named Project Horizon, a global coalition designed to share data without panic. But panic was already rising. In late-night broadcasts, strange coincidences were reported. Fluctuations in satellite clocks, slight distortions in GPS systems, even auroral phenomena in regions untouched by solar storms. Everywhere, electronics hummed with background interference at frequencies once exclusive to 3I Atlas. The signal had entered Earth's electromagnetic environment. It wasn't just approaching, it was arriving. Inside NASA, the mood shifted from curiosity to quiet awe. Some spoke openly of miracles. Others feared contamination not biological, but informational. What if the data itself carried an infection of logic, a pattern capable of altering the human mind simply by being understood? Philosophers were brought in, theologians, even poets. They debated whether knowledge could be dangerous in itself, whether understanding a structure born of different physical laws might fracture our own cognition. The final theoretical group to enter the discussion came from quantum computing. Their idea was simple and devastating. 3I Atlas might operate as a space-time computer, its pulses representing computation cycles executed not in matter, but in reality itself. In that sense, every 92 seconds had been a tick of an unfathomable clock, each cycle rewriting probability distributions of the vacuum around it. And as it neared Earth, the clock was accelerating. Then, one night, the construct's signal reached something it had never touched before: the human nervous system. Electroencephalograph studies revealed that individuals exposed to the low-frequency components of its pulse entered synchronized theta states, dreamlike coherence across hemispheres. Some experienced vivid visions of spirals, mirrors, and infinite corridors of light. One subject, a linguist, whispered a single phrase upon waking. It asked me to remember. The recordings were sealed. For the first time, even the skeptics fell silent. The line between science and the sacred had evaporated. The cosmos was not just being observed anymore, it was responding. And as 3I Atlas glided silently through the void, aligning its course with the cradle of our species, humanity, trembling beneath its own small sun, began to sense the terrible, transcendent truth. The visitor had not come to show us something new. It had come to remind us of what we had forgotten. Fear was the first human instinct to recover after awe. When the initial wonder of 3I Atlas turned into comprehension that it was beyond any remaining doubt, heading toward Earth, the governments of the world began to fracture beneath the quiet weight of what that meant. There was no official announcement, only silence heavy enough to reveal the truth. Telescopes no longer shared their data. Observatory live streams mysteriously went dark. Civilian astronomers found that their access to the object's coordinates had been temporarily restricted due to instrument maintenance. The lie was transparent, but it didn't matter. People could feel something had changed. By late October 2025, 3I Atlas had crossed the orbit of Mars, its path adjusting minutely with each vanishing interval. Each reappearance placed it a little closer to the ecliptic plane, as if following a trajectory invisible to our mathematics. The world's leaders met in secret under the pretext of an environmental summit. But what they discussed was not climate, it was contingency. How does one prepare a civilization for a visitor that defies the physics of its own birth? And, perhaps more urgently, who gets to decide what to tell the world? NASA, now under joint command with the Department of Defense, drafted a protocol that would later be known in whispers as the Containment Accord. It proposed that all information about the object's internal structure, its potential emissions, and especially its influence on human cognition, be sealed indefinitely. There were fears not just of panic, but of psychological collapse. The data itself was dangerous, because even the scientists had begun to change. It began with dreams. Members of Project Argus, those who had been exposed to the raw signal data, started reporting vivid, recurring imagery. Spirals of light folding into mirrors, voices that weren't voices. Some saw entire architectures suspended in darkness, shapes that felt both alien and intimately human, as if remembered from before birth. Neurologists were brought in to study them. EEG scans revealed identical brainwave patterns across different subjects, synchronized theta bursts every 92 seconds. No one could explain how human brains, isolated in separate rooms, could fall into identical rhythms. When the signal was turned off, the pattern persisted. It lingered, as though something had been written into their minds. "It's not radiation," said one of the neuroscientists. "It's resonance." The affected scientists began to describe strange sensations, hearing faint harmonics in silence, seeing geometric afterimages behind their eyelids. They didn't speak of fear, they spoke of recognition. Dr. Miriam Kovac wrote in her private notes, "It feels like it's teaching, not in words, in balance." By then, 3I Atlas was inside the orbit of Earth's defense satellites. It was visible, faintly, even to amateur astronomers, a star that refused to twinkle, a perfect point of steady light, moving with deliberate grace across the October sky. The world looked up and didn't understand what it saw. Some said comet, some said omen. But for those who knew, the object was more than a visitor, it was a mirror. In Geneva, an emergency session of the United Nations tried to draft a coordinated response. Would humanity attempt communication? Would they prepare to defend? The arguments spiraled into despair. "How do you talk to something that speaks in the frequency of existence?" asked one physicist. "How do you defend yourself against a law of nature that can choose to observe you?" Amid the debate, new data arrived from Webb. It showed that 3I Atlas had begun to fragment not physically, but optically. The single object now appeared as a cluster of identical copies, orbiting one another like reflections in a kaleidoscope. Each was a projection of the same structure, displaced by a few nanoseconds in time. In quantum terms, the object was decohering, splitting its probability across multiple realities and recombining them. It was preparing something. And then, on November 3rd, the object entered what analysts called its proximity window, a distance close enough that its electromagnetic field began interacting directly with Earth's magnetosphere. The effects were immediate. Auroras ignited across the equator, compasses failed, satellites reported phantom telemetry, impossible readings of position and time. The vanishing intervals grew longer, at first 12 seconds, then 30, then full minutes during which 3I Atlas ceased to exist by any measurable means, and each time it returned, it appeared closer. Within those absences, gravitational instruments recorded ripples, subtle but real, passing through the planet. Not waves from outside, but vibrations radiating outward from Earth's core, as if the planet itself were resonating in reply. Something beneath us was answering back. The philosophers and theologians had already started writing their manifestos. Some claimed the construct was God returning in physical form. Others said it was the universe awakening to its own reflection, the final step in cosmic evolution, when the observer and the observed become one. Scientists scoffed at these interpretations in public, but privately, the boundary between science and revelation had eroded. Quantum mathematicians began comparing three-eye atlases patterns to structures in the human genome. The correlations were absurd, yet undeniable. Repeating ratios in codon distribution, harmonic symmetry in mitochondrial spin, resonance, all echoing the same golden ratio embedded in the object's light patterns. It was as if the construct's mathematics were already inside us. "Perhaps it didn't come to us," wrote Dr. Tsai in an encrypted message, "because it never left." By now, fear had become a form of reverence. The public, starved of information, filled the void with mythology. Religious movements sprouted overnight. Entire populations began watching the skies in unison, waiting for what they called the alignment. Governments issued statements denying contact, but every denial was more hollow than the last, especially when, on November 7th, the pulse changed again. For the first time in recorded observation, the 92-second interval broke completely. Instead of discrete emissions, a continuous waveform spread across the spectrum, broad, harmonious, enveloping. It wasn't a pulse anymore. It was a chord. Satellites caught the resonance as it passed through Earth's magnetic field, wrapping the planet in a subtle, invisible shimmer. No harmful radiation, no damage, just an overwhelming sense of presence, as though space itself had inhaled and held its breath. Everywhere, clocks ticked out of sync by the same infinitesimal fraction. Every measurement of time on Earth, from atomic oscillators to heartbeat intervals, drifted into collective rhythm. One rhythm, one pulse. A scientist at the European Space Agency described it best. For the first time, the universe and the observer share the same tempo. And deep within NASA's containment vaults, Dr. Miriam Kovacs looked up from her screen, eyes hollow with sleeplessness, and whispered, almost to herself, "It's no longer approaching, it's arriving." The night the world changed was quiet. No explosion, no fire in the heavens, only a deepening hush, as if sound itself had stepped aside to make room for what was coming. At 3:14 UTC on November 10th, 2025, every magnetometer on Earth spiked simultaneously. The cause was invisible, a perfectly uniform wave passing through the planet, neither seismic nor atmospheric, a pulse that rolled across oceans and continents in exact 92-second intervals. For the first time, the rhythm of three-eye atlas was not above us, it was within us. Astronomers scrambled to their instruments. The construct, once a speck of reflected sunlight, now gleamed with its own radiance. It hung beyond lunar orbit, fixed in the sky like a second, colder moon. Its surface shimmered in slow motion, each ripple revealing transient geometries, hexagons, spirals, lattices that folded and unfolded as though the object were breathing mathematics. The first high-resolution images arrived from James Webb and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. What they showed stole the breath from everyone who saw them. The body of Three-Eye Atlas was no longer a single construct. It had divided into thousands of interlocking fragments, each piece suspended in perfect formation, orbiting a shared center. The pattern resembled a sphere made of silence. an enormous, symmetrical shell surrounding a hollow core. Within that core, instruments detected nothing, no light, no radiation, no measurable time. A pocket of absence floating in the middle of form. To physicists, it looked like a gravitational inversion, a region where space-time folded inward, not outward. To theologians, it looked like a chalice. And around that impossible void, the fragments continued to move, each one pulsing faintly at its own harmonic of the hydrogen line, forming a cosmic chord so complex that even the computers translating it could not complete the calculation before it changed again. NASA's Deep Space Array recorded the event in a single, continuous file. For 21 minutes, the planet was bathed in a resonance that defied comprehension. It was not sound, yet every living thing seemed to feel it. Birds ceased flying, whales surfaced, electrical grids hummed in sympathetic vibration. In hospitals, electroencephalographs traced identical oscillations across patients separated by oceans. For those who were awake, there was a moment brief, unmistakable, when the stars themselves seemed to brighten as if the cosmos had exhaled light. Governments tried to contain the narrative. Official statements spoke of atmospheric interference, of optical illusions, but videos leaked, a halo of cold fire hanging above the night horizon, perfectly still against the turning of the earth. Then, without warning, it spoke. The pulse modulated. No language, no symbols, only rhythm. 92 seconds shortened to 90, then to 46, then to 23, halving again and again until it became a continuous vibration, a frequency felt in the bones. Spectral analysis revealed that the sequence encoded prime numbers, not by amplitude, but by spacing, a universal fingerprint of intelligence. Humanity's oldest hope and its oldest fear had just been realized. Project Horizon transmitted a reply, a burst of data containing mathematical constants, atomic tables, and the binary greeting, hello. For 6 hours, there was no response. Then, at 9:46 UTC, the construct's light flared once, twice, 3 times, then stopped. Every receiver fell silent. It had heard us. In the days that followed, the silence deepened. 3I Atlas remained motionless, the great crystalline halo glinting faintly against the sun's reflection. But strange phenomena began to occur closer to home. Quantum clocks in orbit drifted backward by fractions of a second. Particles in CERN's Large Hadron Collider displayed spontaneous entanglement across impossible distances. Satellites captured images of faint auroral ribbons connecting the object to Earth's poles, filaments of plasma shaped not by the solar wind, but by geometric precision. It was as if the planet itself were being drawn into alignment, every molecule negotiating a new relationship with time. Relativity was no longer constant. Space and time, once reliable foundations, began to behave like suggestions. For a brief and terrible moment, gravity itself fluctuated. Objects dropped in laboratories landed a heartbeat too soon, as if the Earth had pulled them closer. Every pendulum in the world swung a little faster. No one knew whether this was contact or collapse. The world's religions moved faster than its scientists. Pilgrimages began toward every high plateau, every clear horizon where the construct could be seen. Some knelt, others sang. Still, others refused to look, fearing that the act of seeing might draw its attention. But in one sense, it was too late. It had already seen everything. Deep space sensors confirmed that 3I Atlas was mapping the Earth's magnetic field in microscopic detail, tracing the pulse of every storm, every current, every heartbeat of the planet. Its energy output fluctuated in direct correspondence with the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic whisper between the ground and the sky. The universe and the Earth were now in dialogue. Inside NASA, the few scientists still granted access to the data reached a consensus they refused to put into official print. 3. I-Atlas was not a ship, not a message, not even a visitor. It was a test. Something ancient, perhaps timeless, had released it long ago, a mechanism designed to awaken when a civilization learned to observe it. Its purpose was to measure not technology, but consciousness, to see if a species could perceive itself reflected in the infinite. If so, it would respond. If not, it would move on, leaving nothing but the echo of possibility. And in those long hours, when the object hung above the world, silent and absolute, no one could say which answer humanity had given. Then, without announcement, the construct began to fade, not by distance, but by dissolution. Its fragments turned translucent, dissolving into light that bent inward back into the hollow core. One by one, the shards folded into the void until only a single point remained, a white dot no larger than a star. At 11:11 UTC, 3I Atlas blinked once and vanished. For a heartbeat, every radio telescope on Earth recorded perfect silence, absolute zero noise. Then the universe resumed its hum, unchanged yet different, as though a question had been asked and answered in the same instant. When instruments recalibrated, the sky was empty. No trace, no debris, no gravitational residue, only the faint afterglow of coherence lingering in the ionosphere, a ghostly shimmer that slowly faded with dawn. The mystery had departed, leaving only a whisper. A line in the final Argus log entry, time-stamped minutes after the disappearance. Subject no longer present. Local spacetime metrics stabilized. Background radiation increased by 0.000432%. The same number that had haunted them from the beginning. And in that meaningless fraction, every scientist felt the same quiet certainty that the visitor had not gone anywhere at all. It had simply finished watching. When 3I Atlas disappeared, the world expected relief. Instead, it left behind a silence so vast that humanity mistook it for grief. The sky was once again its old, familiar black, but something in that blackness felt altered, charged, as though the stars had learned to listen. The first days after the vanishing were filled with frantic measurement. Satellites recalibrated, telescopes scoured the void. Nothing. No gravitational echoes, no residual radiation, no trace of debris. The construct had exited space the way a thought leaves a mind intangible, complete, untraceable. But physics, precise and cruel, offered one clue. The faint rise in background radiation, the 0.000432% anomaly. The number repeated itself across disciplines, cosmology, particle physics, even climate models. Everywhere, a subtle shift toward coherence. On paper, it meant nothing. In the language of the universe, it was change. Weeks passed. The world's attention faltered, drifting back to wars, elections, storms. But beneath the surface, the anomaly deepened. Quantum laboratories found that certain isotopes decayed more slowly. Optical experiments showed photons maintaining entanglement longer than theory allowed. Reality, it seemed, was tightening its weave. Dr. Miriam Kovacs, now estranged from NASA and living in quiet exile near the Nevada desert, kept recording. Her private notebooks became scripture to those few who still sought answers. In them, she described a new rhythm woven through nature itself. Every 92 seconds, the magnetic field hums a little louder. It's as if the Earth remembers something, a song it was once taught. She had begun to suspect that the disappearance of 3I Atlas was not an ending, but a phase transition, the completion of a dialogue humanity could not yet translate. The construct, she wrote, might have left not into distance, but into us. Across the world, evidence whispered in unlikely places. In Antarctica, neutrino detectors caught faint, rhythmic modulations. In orbit, the James Webb Telescope recorded spectral lines, slightly shifted toward higher-order harmonics, as though the universe itself had tuned upward by a fraction of a note. Mathematicians at CERN noticed that when plotted against cosmic background data, the 0.0000432% rise matched a Fibonacci ratio. Not an exact proof, but enough to unsettle the cautious. Some physicists proposed that 3I Atlas had reset a local segment of space-time, restabilizing quantum constants the way a musician retunes an instrument. Others insisted that humanity had been marked, that observation itself had changed, and that from this moment on, the act of looking into the cosmos would no longer be neutral. In philosophical journals, a new discipline was born: reflexive cosmology, the study of consciousness as a cosmological force. Its premise was radical, that the universe evolves not by chance, but by awareness, and that awareness, once mirrored back to itself, becomes creation. Meanwhile, the dreams returned. Those who had once worked on Project Argus continued to share a quiet, unbearable intimacy. They still saw spirals in their sleep, still heard the low humming chord. Some reported luminous figures forming from interference patterns, beings made of symmetry and rhythm. When recorded and analyzed, their brainwaves showed precise 92-second oscillations, each surge aligned with Earth's new electromagnetic pulse. In secret correspondence, Kovacs wrote to one of them, "It's not haunting us, it's finishing the conversation." And in those words, she outlined a hypothesis too delicate for publication, that the construct's final act had been integration, that consciousness and cosmos were now entangled in permanent dialogue. 3I Atlas had not come to reveal alien life. It had come to remind existence that it could think. Governments never confirmed it, but whispers spread of a hidden NASA memo titled Post-Contact Stabilization Report. The document allegedly described spontaneous coherence across global electromagnetic systems, suggesting the planet itself was now resonating as a single organism. The line most often quoted from that report, though no one ever proved it existed, read simply, "Entropy remains stable, but meaning increases." By December, the world's sky had returned to its ordinary glitter. Children learned new constellations that their parents swore had not been there before. Some astronomers claimed certain stars had shifted by fractions of arc-seconds, aligning into patterns resembling the geometry of 3I Atlas. Coincidence, perhaps, or a reminder. Humanity's telescopes pointed outward again, but this time the gaze felt different, softer, humbler. Scientists spoke less of conquest, more of communion. The language of physics became almost liturgical. Resonance, harmony, symmetry. Words once dismissed as poetic became tools of calculation. And in observatories from Chile to Mauna Kea, when the night grew too still, some swore they could hear it again, that low, steady rhythm beneath the static of the stars. 92 seconds apart, the heartbeat of the silence between worlds. Perhaps the greatest change of all was unseen. Across the vast digital archives of humanity, from data centers to forgotten hard drives, researchers discovered recurring corruption in files recorded during the weeks surrounding 3 Atlas's arrival. Every fragment of lost code contained the same binary anomaly, a repeating pattern that, when translated into sound, produced a perfect, unwavering tone, 432 hertzes. The note of resonance. It was as though the universe had signed its name. In her final entry before disappearing from public life, Dr. Kovacs wrote, "It came to measure us, and we mistook it for a threat. It came to remember itself, and we called it alien. Perhaps the cosmos has only one experiment to see if awareness can love what it observes." No one ever found her body. Only her telescope remained, turned upward, its lens forever pointed toward the black between Lyra and Hercules, the place where the silent visitor first appeared. And though the sky holds no trace of it now, somewhere, between every breath and every thought, the rhythm endures, a pulse too soft for machines, too perfect for coincidence, too familiar to the eye. Morning came to a quieter world. Cities woke, traffic returned, satellites resumed their usual rhythm, and yet beneath the surface hum of civilization, something subtle had changed. The earth seemed lighter, its silence more articulate, as if every sound carried an echo of meaning. Astronomers kept searching, unable to accept absence. Telescopes swept the sky again and again, desperate for any glint of what had vanished. None appeared. Only the aftertaste of light remained, a faint whisper of coherence that lingered in radio noise like the echo of a bell long gone. And then, one by one, they began to notice it. A new steadiness in measurement, a reduction in cosmic background variation. The universe, at least in our local region, had grown calmer. The noise between stars was not as random as before. To most, it meant nothing. To a few, it was proof of everything. Across the scientific world, quiet revolutions began. Equations once treated as boundaries now behaved like doors. Experiments once plagued by chaos now produced coherence where none should exist. Randomness had softened. At CERN, protons collided with unnerving elegance. The debris formed symmetrical cascades too perfect for coincidence. The event logs described the phenomenon with one strange word: grace. At Fermilab, quantum superpositions persisted longer than ever recorded, as if the act of being observed no longer collapsed possibility, but sustained it. And somewhere, in a university observatory tucked high in the Andes, a graduate student measuring the cosmic microwave background detected a subtle harmonic overlay, a low, repeating hum at exactly 432 Hz. The same tone that haunted NASA's servers, now embedded in the oldest light of the cosmos. It was no longer a visitor's signature. It had become part of the fabric of reality. Humanity adjusted in ways that could never be charted by data. A kind of collective quietude descended not fear, but reverence. Scientists wrote less, observed more. Philosophers began describing consciousness not as an accident of evolution, but as the universe awakening to itself through temporary forms. Even those untouched by science felt it. Art changed. Music drifted toward harmonic resonance. Architects began designing structures in spirals and ratios that echoed natural form. Poetry found its way back into the language of laboratories. The line between emotion and equation dissolved. No one spoke of contact anymore. The word had become too small. What had happened was not communication, it was communion. The cosmos had looked into its own reflection, and in the brief shimmer of that encounter, every thinking thing had seen the outline of itself within the infinite. A year later, an unmanned probe launched toward the region of sky, once traced by 3I Atlas. Its mission was simple: to confirm nothing remained. It found nothing, no debris, no gravity well, not even an anomaly in starfield alignment. Yet when its instruments powered down, a final burst of telemetry returned to Earth. The signal contained no data, only static. But when the static was run through spectral analysis, it revealed faint peaks exactly 92 seconds apart. Someone or something had whispered goodbye in the language of physics. NASA classified the finding. But by then secrecy had lost its meaning. The story of Three-Eye Atlas had already become myth, living between the lines of scientific papers and the verses of dreamers. Dr. Miriam Kovacs's telescope still stood in the desert, half buried in dust. Students sometimes visited the site, leaving small offerings, journals, bits of circuitry, fragments of poems. They would sit in silence as the stars rose, listening for something they could never quite describe. Sometimes, in the windless hours before dawn, the air would tremble just slightly, a vibration, deep and patient, pulsing every 92 seconds. Perhaps it was the Earth itself remembering. In time, the official narrative would harden into history. Three-Eye Atlas, the third interstellar object, anomalous but natural, its mystery unresolved. But in private, among those who had looked too closely, a quieter understanding endured. The construct had not come to reveal aliens or to threaten humanity with knowledge. It had come to complete a circuit older than stars, the loop between awareness and creation. It had reminded us that the laws of physics were never laws at all, only habits of perception, that reality is not something observed, but something continually written by the act of seeing. And in that realization lay both the terror and the beauty of existence, that every consciousness is a mirror through which the universe confirms itself real. Now the visitor is gone, but the mirror remains. Every heartbeat, every flicker of thought, every photon reflecting off an eye, each is a continuation of that ancient conversation. And so, when the night grows still, and the stars seem to hum faintly with unseen music, remember, the universe once spoke, not in words, but in pattern and patience. And in that moment, for one fragile species orbiting a small yellow star, it left behind a single truth. We are not alone, because we have never been apart. The night returns, soft and unbroken. The stars drift in their endless rhythm, whispering their quiet arithmetic across eternity. Somewhere, perhaps far beyond the limits of light, Three-Eye Atlas moves again, or perhaps it never ceased, only stepped sideways into the silence between moments. The earth spins on, wrapped in its delicate pulse. Oceans breathe in the long exhalation of the tides. Cities hum their small symphonies of light. And within each living mind, faint but eternal, the same resonance lingers, the memory of being seen. We will tell this story again, though we will not know why. We will search the dark, not for answers, but for remembrance, for the hum beneath thought, for the pattern behind chance, for the echo that makes silence beautiful. One day, another eye may open in the void. Another civilization may look up and find a shape gliding through its sky, cold, perfect, uninvited. They will feel what we felt, that impossible mix of fear and wonder, the sense of being measured by infinity. And when they listen, if they listen well, they will hear it too, the same 92-second heartbeat woven into the music of creation. The visitor will never truly leave. It will drift wherever awareness blooms, waiting patiently for recognition, because that is what the universe has always been, a vast field of mirrors, endlessly reflecting itself until even silence sings. And so, as the stars wheel overhead and the night leans closer, let the final thought fall softly. We are the echo of a conversation that began before time, and the echo endures. Sweet dreams.